This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, feminism killed feminism. Our very special guest this evening, and back by popular demand, Daniel Greenfield, Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor/writer at the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. Daniel, welcome to the Glazov Gang.
Thank you, Jamie. As always, it's good to be back.
You've written a brilliant article at Front Page Magazine, and every article of yours is brilliant. I had to get you on to discuss this because this is really something that's happening in the world today, and also very symbolic of what these utopian revolutions do. There's often an ingredient of justice, as we know, in a lot of movements towards human rights, towards trying to make things fair. And then once the Bolsheviks grab a movement of justice on some levels, then they turn it into something very evil. And I think that we're dealing with that in this case. So you've written an article, Feminism Killed Feminism. The transgender movement is the end result of feminism's hatred of women. I'll just say one more thing, because when I close my eyes and I think about this, I think about the left pretending it's for feminism, pretending it's for women's rights, and then step after step after step of what the Bolsheviks do, in the end, we now have men identifying as women, cracking women's skulls in the MMA cages. And this is actually the very logical end result of these utopian leftist revolutions on every realm. Let me hand it over to you, Daniel. Why did you write this essay, and tell us about your main argument?
Well, so as you said, these are justice movements, which is to say the left uses some sort of injustice as a pretext, class injustice, racial injustice, injustice toward women. They find some sort of pretext to grab onto, and they claim that they are going to liberate, they are going to empower these people who are being oppressed. In practice, of course, they absolutely destroy these people each and every single time. You can take a look at the Black community, where the consequences of all the leftist attempts to save them are just manifest all around us. Take any of the immigrant groups that the left ever fastened onto. They imposed Planned Parenthood on them. They imposed a social welfare state on them that absolutely debilitated them. And when it comes to women, things are absolutely no different. Feminism claimed that it was out there to help women. Now, it's important to remember that the early forms of what are called feminist movements were actually, in many cases, Christian. They were based around, yes, they're based around certain kinds of legal equality, but they're also based around protecting young girls from sexual abuse. This is something we've very much forgotten about. They were aimed at things like, we're talking 19th century, raising age of consent laws, so you couldn't just actually abuse 12-year-old girls and things like that. The left, of course, has completely reversed that. They're trying to reverse age of consent. They're trying to push it as far down as possible, but this was actually a feminist achievement, something we've lost track of. What we actually refer to as the feminist movements, though, of course, have gone in the absolutely the other direction. And they were based not on appreciating women, not on empowering women, but on saying that women are basically not good enough, that women need to start acting more like men in order to be respected, in order to be competitive. And, you know, there was the feminist movement was redolent, particularly in the 60s, was redolent of contempt for women, for stay-at-home mothers, for people who are housewives, for anybody who did not spend all their time trying to aggressively pursue a career. Hillary Clinton was the prototype of that. This was somebody who claimed that she tried to join the Marines, that she tried to join NASA. Almost certainly lies, like everything else that comes out of Hillary's mouth. But she made a point: she's not a stand-by-your-man type of woman. She is not going to be at home baking cookies. She's going to be a hard-charging, aggressive lawyer who, one of her famous cases was actually defending the rapist of a 12-year-old girl. But, you know, this is very much feminism. And feminism now has achieve the end result where it's officially being replaced, where women are being written out. There are birthing people, there are womb havers, and you lose track of all these various euphemisms. There are as many euphemisms as there are genders at this point. But the point is that women increasingly do not exist. Women are being written out of existence. Even the Feminist Majority Foundation, Miss Magazine, all of these are increasingly erasing women from the picture because they have gotten what they wanted, which is the masculinization of women. And now there are men who insist that they're women, and thus they've eliminated sex, they've eliminated the basic concept of men and women altogether, which is exactly what they'd wanted to do all along. They were never about empowering women, they were about eliminating women and eliminating men and eliminating the norm and the human family. And feminism was just one way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. And those of us who care about justice, we agonize over these things, and we have to try to explain some things, because a lot of times the people watching and listening to some of the things we're saying, there's constant misunderstandings of what we're saying. So let's just start at a few places here. So let's just think about the word feminist, feminism. For instance, when we look at what the Chinese regime does to women, when we look at what Iran is doing to women and to its citizens overall, but on the subject of women, when we think about how women have been abused in many spheres in history and many societies, are we feminists in the sense that we believe that every human being in every gender deserves respect and dignity and not to be abused? Absolutely. So we're feminist in that regard, in terms of equal treatment and against abuse, etc., right? And standing up for the rights of women in places where there really is abuse and discrimination, etc. And then, as we said and we discussed, that in these justice movements, when the Bolsheviks come along, and then, like I often think about Aaron Russo. He's the filmmaker. He did Trading Places and other films. But he was talking about his discussions with David Rockefeller and these globalists. And he says how David Rockefeller once said to him, "What do you think feminism was about?" And Aaron was like, "Well, it was about equal rights." And, and Rockefeller was just laughing, saying, he said to him, "You're such an idiot." Rousseau says, "Why am I an idiot?" Because the globalists were behind that. And you got to think about, why was the CIA funding Miss Magazine, Gloria Steinem's Miss Magazine? You got to think about these things. Why would the CIA be behind that? What were these people doing? And Rockefeller said to him, "You're a moron. What we did was, we took 50% of humans, got them into the workforce so we could tax them, get them working for us, enslave them, get them working, and then even more importantly, get the mother out of the home. Then we grab the kids. Then we start brainwashing the kids." And this is all very scary, but it's something we need to look at and always understand that, as Thomas Sowell always emphasized, there's always the cost-benefit analysis. For every change you make, there's always a cost. And as conservatives, is people who also believe and aim for God's moral law, etc., etc. We have to keep an eye on these things, because again, once these totalitarian Bolshevik movements come in, they can manipulate movements that really are for justice on many levels. But go ahead, Daniel. What do you think about what I just said?
Well, certainly, I kind of concluded by discussing the dismantling of the family. This is a key ingredient because the family is an alternative to the left's various political systems. So every leftist agenda ultimately is about the destruction of the family. It's about destroying any kind of religious community, any kind of community that they do not define and do not control. And the family is the most intimate of those communities. And the family shapes us. It tells us who we are. It exists outside of government control. So yes, getting women into the workforce, getting kids into permanent, it's the obsession now is getting them into some kind of government daycare by the age of 2, by the age of 1 for that matter, having them shaped from the very beginning by a centralized system is how you can control the outcome for everything. And so much of this came out of the 19th century. And these various ideas, feminism was a term that dates back from there. produced by a French socialist, male socialist, by the way, was really about reinventing society on their terms. And they wanted to reinvent society by controlling all of human experiences. The big idea that they had back then was that people were entirely interchangeable. And this is something that the left still argues now. If you take two children, you raise them under the same conditions, no matter how different they might be, none of this really matters, because if we control how those children are raised, the schools they go to, this is where public school and universal education comes from. If you control those things, then you control the outcome and you can make them to be anyone you want them to be. Thus, you end up with, in theory, Homo Sovieticus, you end up with the new man, the one who is going to be completely under the control of the left. And of course, that never actually works in real life. There is God, there is a soul, there is whatever inborn characteristics we have. As a father, you see this very early on. The child is not just some malleable piece of clay that you shape and control. Rather, it's a human being who, from the very, very start, has their own personality. But the left, of course, is built on denying all of this. It's built on playing God, which means they have to destroy all the old. They have to take control of a new society. And feminism, obviously, was a key ingredient in doing that. The left creates grudges, it creates grievances, it divides people. So it's, the prototypical, there's a Yiddish term, kachlefo, which basically means busybody. When there's any conflict, any tension, the left comes in and says, you are the victim. We need to discuss how you're the victim, how we can get you the power you deserve, the compensation you deserve. It's like one of those lawyer ads. Have you been outraged? Have you been victimized? We'll fight for you. And of course, the left fights for itself. It destroys the very people who eat from that apple, who are seduced by it. Working class is another example. What they've done to the working class is incredibly destructive. And they do that in the name of their power. And of course, they were going to do that to women all along.
Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with finding the words to explain some of these things and to talk about it, because I think I'm already getting kind of old, because when I look at this younger generation, and I'm around a lot of people, and I'm in some athletic environments, and I see a lot of young people and people overall, and when I see the contemporary women, especially here in Los Angeles, and of course there's a lot of exceptions, we got that, but overall I see a certain misery in both genders. And the deep state, the left, the globalists, and I'll throw Lucifer in there as a Christian because I believe that there's very evil powers involved in this. They've deprived women of male love, and they've deprived males of female love. And there's such misery. When I think about the earlier generation that I'm a part of, people were much happier and women were much happier at that time. And I wonder what happened. And so one thing I just want to say quickly here to avoid misunderstanding. I don't think anybody's saying here, why, to somebody that's not married, you need to get married. Why didn't you have kids? You need to get a husband. You need to have a wife. This is not where we're coming from, in the sense of, in the human condition, there's many people for whom things didn't turn out. Maybe there was abuse. Maybe they didn't find the right connection. Maybe there was some difficulties or misfortune, and maybe for some people marriage just didn't end up the way that life happened for them, or to have kids. And we understand that, and there has to be compassion and understanding in that regard. But that doesn't mean that we abolish what is the ideal optimum. And so when the Lord says, be fruitful and multiply, and it is not good for a man to be alone. Of course, the extension there is also that it's not good for a woman to be alone. That there's an ideal here of getting married, of having children. And so we can talk about the male gender, but right now we're focusing on feminism. And so clearly what we've seen happen, and what I've seen with my own eyes, what happened especially in the last 10, 20 years, is, how can I say this? I'll even start with some of my very close female friends over the last few years that have whispered to me, some of them that didn't end up very happy or things went wrong, but they say to me, Jamie, now that if I could take time back, I would have loved to just maybe have been a mom or just to stay home, but I couldn't face the criticism of my family and my friends. There was so much pressure to be the boss woman and go get your businesses, etc., etc. Anyway, just not to get into too long of a tirade here, but Daniel, but definitely something happened where the powers that be were telling the women, you can be like a man. You don't want to have babies. You don't want to get married. Go get your this, go get that, be the boss. And they actually frowned on those choices. And they actually didn't give freedom on those choices, because if a woman chose to do the traditional things, they were laughed at and demonized and marginalized. But that has led on many levels to a lot of misery. And in your article, you talk about the depression rates and all kinds of things now in terms of women, and especially younger women. Tell us about that.
On paper, if you follow the feminist ideal, women are living this feminist ideal. There are now more women in college, far more women in college by admissions than men. Women are now outnumbering men in medical school and law school. There are female fighter pilots. The great feminist dream is certainly real. Economically, women are able to outcompete men, yet female depression rates are higher than ever. Suicide rates for teenage girls are absolutely catastrophic. And these are the same teenage girls that are being told, you need to go into STEM, you need to do all the stuff, you need to be strong and independent. And you know what? As indeed you quoted the Bible saying, it is not good for man, it's not good for any of us to be alone. And much of what this does is pushes us to be alone. It tells us that our priorities, but this is also true for men as for women, that our central priorities should be making money, that our central priorities should be career, that our central priorities should be getting more stuff, which is very much the American norm now, unfortunately. After September 11th, Bush told everybody, go back and buy stuff. This is a great fundamental tragedy, which is that we've lost our sense of meaning and purpose, religious, personal, and the result is much harder on women than it is on men, because women are naturally more social and they have a more limited timetable. They're also much more vulnerable to social and peer pressure, again, as you described, hearing from your female friends. For a man, it's much easier to just strike out on your own, do your own thing, ignore what society says, drop out. For women, this is much, much harder to do. And women are much more vulnerable to pressure about their looks, about their choices, about their decisions, and they second guess outside criticism. To me, as a man, this is something that is very fundamentally alien, but the degree to which this influences the choices of women is massive. And if you look at that, you can understand the transgender movement, why it affects teenage girls so much more so than men, because there are far more teenage girls undergoing this process. And, you know, as a man, if you told me as a teenage boy, well, maybe you should be a woman, I would have just laughed him off. But to a teenage girl, this is an age where you have all sorts of body dysmorphic disorders, all sorts of problems kicking in. What they see in the media very much influences them. We're seeing the effect all around. Even the New York Times was recently forced to admit this in an article, that much of this transgender phenomenon is being driven by peer pressure on teenage girls. There's a lot of history behind this, unfortunately. The Middle Ages, there was something called, for example, the dancing sickness. Throughout this, we've had various manias, which heavily impacted women. So women are much more socially attuned. And when society itself is broken, it impacts women much more than it does men. It impacts men somewhat more indirectly, but men kind of have a better immune system to society, let's say. Men are less socially connected. Women are very intimately plugged in, and with social media, with TikTok, where they're getting messages all the time, it's kind of like a mental virus. You know, we don't need the futuristic concepts where there's going to be brain implants or whatever they're planning. We've got this right now. Pretty much every teenage girl in America is immediately plugged into social media. She's getting these messages all the time. It's warping her self-esteem, and it's causing stratospheric depression and suicide rates like we've never seen in history before.
Absolutely. All of this Instagram and everything that I wanted to talk about, just what I see happening. But just let me back up for a second. So thank you, Daniel. So also with some things, there's just no easy answer. So one thing that we're not saying is, again, obviously there are situations where there are men, let's say, who never found the right mate to marry, or were treated very badly. And there are women who perhaps wanted to find a husband or wanted to have a family, but they didn't find the right mate, or there may have been abusive situations and things just didn't work out. We got that. We're also not saying, hey, you should just, to a woman, we're not saying you should be homeless, don't get a job, don't have money as backup, you know, just wait for a man and let him lead. And we know that that stuff can lead to disastrous consequences, and everybody needs to have some kind of power and education, etc. We got all that. At the same time, Daniel, you know, I remember I was very impressed, if that is a word, but it left an indelible mark on me because I read about all these things a lot. And accumulatively, what they write about human nature and in the human condition is the way that romance works in the human condition is there's femininity and masculinity between a man and a woman. And femininity is interconnected with being fragile and vulnerable on several levels. There's a certain vulnerability and fragility in women that is interconnected with their femininity. And the man, the masculine part of him, which is the protector, in some ways the knight in shining armor, even though all that stuff is laughed at today. But that's what creates romance. And so when these Bolsheviks and societal forces, when they are making Mike Tysons out of women, and of course they're emasculating men, that's a whole other thing too, you completely destroy the ability for a romantic dynamic. And and then add Instagram to that, and OnlyFans, and all this stuff that's happening. Is it any surprise why today, you know, I grew up on Jodeci, Boys to Men, 112, and in a previous generation there was soul music, a lot of love songs. You don't find almost anything like that today because this generation laughs at stuff like that. A lot of the younger women I know, if you play some of these love songs, if you play even Whitney Houston singing How Will I Know If He Really Loves Me, they scoff at that because they don't need a man, they don't want a man, or that's what they've been told to believe. Could you comment on that a bit, that the whole dynamic that's required for romance in and of itself between man and woman has been destroyed on many levels?
And as far as love songs, I think the current genre of love songs is very much narcissistic. It's love songs to oneself. It is very much the I choose myself brand, which of course is again ultimately unhappy. Narcissists are ultimately unhappy. They're always going to be unhappy, and they're going to seek to blame other people for their unhappiness, which I think is a very basic dynamic in the feminist movement today, and in general behavior by some men and women as well. But as far as the specifics of what you're saying, so men and women do need to need each other. Otherwise, if they don't need each other, then what is the actual point? If you don't have a necessity for a man to actually, if a woman doesn't bring anything to that relationship because the man feels that he's entirely self-sufficient, or the woman feels that she's entirely self-sufficient, and she doesn't need the man, then nothing actually ever happens, which is what we see so often. And we see some of these modern relationships where really they're not actually offering anything to each other. There is a very casual, no commitment situation that goes nowhere. And via what you said initially, we're not judging anybody's personal choices. Everybody has their own challenges. Everybody has their own drive. Everybody is making their own choices. This is about how the left politically poisons this well, how it distorts men and women, and how our societies become distorted around it. And it's important to understand that. This is not about stigmatizing anybody. So, there are no perfect people out there as religious people. We know that all too well. But we also know that there are outside forces that drive people down, that push them down, that get them to destroy themselves and each other. And this is where very much what we're seeing. The idea that women should not be feminine, that men should not be masculine. Well, we actually get the transgender movement that way. The idea that traditional roles are, of course, completely outmoded. And yet, of course, traditional roles are a biological reality. They can't be outmoded. We can deny them. We can deny them up and down. We can insist that women can serve in frontline combat just as well as men can. We can insist that when a man puts on a wig, he's no stronger than a woman. But of course, none of this is reality. This is just a lie that we are imposing on ourselves. And eventually people sicken of that lie, they tire of it, and they speak out against it. But it's also important to understand the root cause of a lot of this, because there's a lot of the feminists who are attacking the transgender movement. And of course, they're right about the wrongness of the movement. But at the same time, they're not actually engaging in any real accountability about how we got here, which is the elimination of the sex binary, the elimination of normal roles for men and women, which does not mean some stereotypical thing where the woman just sits at home all the time and does nothing else, and anything else is unacceptable, or that the man needs to be, killing saber-toothed tigers every day. There's it's the left that actually engages in straw men, that pushes this kind of extreme stereotypical thing. But there is a normal male-female balance. It is a healthy balance. It's different in different couples and different relationships, but it does need to be there. There needs to be a give and a take. And what the left does is it eliminates the give and the take between men and women, leaving behind nothing. People who are just, in the contemporary term, partners rather than husband and wife.
Yeah. And Daniel, and so I think about these utopian movements, these Bolshevik movements and the left, and how much they hate humans. And for me as a Christian, and I think that we share perhaps some views on this because we believe in evil, perhaps a little bit in different ways, but as Christians, we believe in the spiritual realm, and all of this is a war against the Creator and God's creation. A lot of this man-hatred, of course, is a direct war against God the Father. But Satan is always trying to overthrow the moral law of God, of our Creator, and what He meant for there to be between men and women. And we see this on every level. And so, what I think about is, let's say the serpent in the Garden of Eden, what he's always whispering to people. And, so he says to Eve, this is in your interest, because that's also, I studied psychopaths for many, many years. They always appeal to they're pretending that they're appealing to your interest, but they're lying to you, right? And this is what the devil is doing all the time. So in the Garden of Eden, hey, you can gain immortality. You can live forever by going to eat that apple, and you can become just like God, and you can do this, and you can do this. So he convinces Eve to do it. Then Eve, and then Adam listens to Eve, and then all of a sudden they destroy themselves. Then what continues? Then Satan's coming up whispering to women, oh, you know what? You can be just like a man. You can be just as powerful as a man. But then what's the next stage? You don't even have to be as powerful as a man. You can be a man. Then he comes to the man. You can be a woman. Just chop off your penis and call yourself Stephanie. Then you can be in women's sports. And I know that might sound funny or crude, but this is exactly what's happening. And we cannot deny that the movement that's telling human beings these things hates these human beings. And so, Daniel, feminism, leftism, leftist feminism, okay, first wave, second wave, third wave. And so now what's happening? Female sports is actually being erased because the men are coming in and doing what now?
Yeah, the female sports used to be the big civil rights victory. We got to get equal funding for female sports, female athletics in colleges. And of course, now the latest wave of social justice is making a mockery of that by effectively eliminating female sports as anything that's at all meaningful, because, you get a man on your team and game over. But, we have to look at the underlying issue here. Why are people doing things like this? Why would a man castrate himself? Why would teenage girls undergo what they call top surgery, effectively mastectomies, unless they are fundamentally unhappy? And this is really the thing that we need to deal with. So much of our society's problems come down to people's unhappiness. The left, the various, like they like to say, scientists and experts and researchers told us these are the things we could do to be happy. We could be more narcissistic, we could be more selfish, we could be less religious, we could just pursue whatever we wanted, and we would be happy. This was the great message of the 60s counterculture. Just do your own thing. And are we happy? No, our society is fantastically unhappy. I would even say supernaturally unhappy. And our suicide rates are off the charts. And this is a kind of a suicide. You look at the mirror, you look at the person looking back at you, and you hate that person. You want to get rid of that person. So maybe you commit suicide, or maybe you decide, what will make me happy is completely switching genders. And we know this is how it happens because the people who try to transition back, who have undergone this, who have undergone surgery, have undergone even just chemicals, those people talk about how unhappy they were and how they were told, well, this is what was actually going to fulfill you. It's very much like the way people were caught up in cults. They were very unhappy, and they ran into somebody who told them, well, you join this movement will make you happy. You get into this political cause, it will make you happy. You completely destroy yourself, it will make you happy. It never does. It never does. Purpose, meaning in life makes you happy. Religion, for that matter, makes you happy. God makes you happy. When you pursue whatever drives you at any point in time, and yes, it is the message of the serpent, and that is what is going to make you unhappy and is going to destroy you in the end.
Very, very scary stuff, how the left operates. We're going to take a quick break with our sponsors.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell. Years ago, when I invented MyPillow, I was faced with every adversity you could think of. No retailers wanted to sell MyPillow. That's come full circle. Vendors took advantage of me, and I was copied by China. Well, by the grace of God, I was able to get through all that and learn from it. I have a passion to help other U.S. entrepreneurs, and that's why I created my new platform, mystore.com. We have hundreds of products from amazing entrepreneurs, and to celebrate, I'm going to put my pillows on mystore.com right now. You can get my standard My Pillows regularly $69.98, now only $19.98 with your promo code. Or you can get my standard queen size, regular $79.98, now only $29.98. Or you can get my premium king size, regularly $89.98, now only $34.98. So go to mystore.com and use that promo code on your screen to get huge discounts on all my store products. Thank you and God bless.
And we are back with the one and only Daniel Greenfield discussing his brilliant article, Feminism Killed Feminism. And Daniel, so let's continue this discussion. You know, something I'm also noticing, it takes a while to explain this, and I don't want to go on too long of a tirade, but I think back to my generation, and again, I'll use a gym setting or a university setting, but the women and men all talked. We all talked with one another, and women engaged, and we were all very good friends, and there was, you know, and there's still some pockets. For sure, I'm not saying this doesn't exist, but I'm talking about the overall establishment cultures, especially in Miami and here in Los Angeles. By the way, I was in Tennessee a couple years ago, and in the evening, I just walked up to this coffee shop, and I have to admit, I was very taken aback by the friendliness and camaraderie between the girls and the boys and the men and the women in the coffee shop. It was very refreshing. In terms of what's going on here in LA and the establishment culture. But my point is that in a lot of places where I frequent and where I socialize and the athletic establishments, a lot of the women are now coming in, they're almost naked. The yoga pants, it's not even yoga pants set anymore, it's underwear and underwear bra. They have this matching thing, so they're 99% naked, headphone on, staring at their phone. It's the overall culture. They don't look at anybody. They have this kind of stare, and they don't speak. And there's a given that the men should not speak to them. That's a whole analysis. I don't know who they think they are or if they're royalty or whatever, but in this particular culture. So then they go and surprise, surprise, they're doing squats and they're pretending that they're there for their workout. But for some reason, when they're doing their squats and these other exercises, they're doing it in front of 200-300 men. And it's very, very sexualized. Where I'm going with this, and I know that this is, we try to make a PG show here, but I'm trying to get to something. Many, many of these women are trying to trigger the lust of men, clearly. But they're pretending that that's not what they're doing. But it is what they're doing. They don't go into like the, you know, the yoga room or the, you know, some private room. They are doing it for attention. At the same time, they believe and they say that they don't need men, they don't want men. So they're trying to trigger the arousal and lust of men of a certain gender. You know, I've given a lot of thought to this, just trying to figure out what's going on all these years that I'm observing this. So they're trying to trigger arousal and lust in men, At the same time, their position is that they don't need men and they don't want men. They don't speak to anybody. Then they go home and they haven't spoken to anybody. And it's quite lonely, I would think. Now, don't get me wrong. This gets very complicated because a lot of the women that I speak to that are not like this, and they say to me, Jamie, you're absolutely right. Yes, there is that particular realm of women in these cities in Los Angeles, etc. And they say, but Jamie, what's also happened is if we try to speak with men and if we're friendly, a lot of the men now are almost, I could call them a little bit of a Taliban mentality. They're very perverted. They try to sexualize things right away with women now. So the men are also, this is a vicious cycle. A lot of men also, in terms of how they treat women, it's become much worse. The moment a woman will give a lot of these men attention, the men use it for very bad purposes. Anyway, but where I'm going with all of this is there's a disconnect. There's no longer this friendship. There's no longer this humility anymore of interaction. Something very poisonous is happening, and it definitely is causing a cleavage between the genders. Daniel, your thoughts?
Well, there are two things going on. First of all, is the social codes that govern how we treat each other have collapsed, and they've been replaced by nothing but what the left calls the ethos of consent, which of course just means that anything people consent to is perfectly fine, and thus there's an obsession with men getting women to consent and women second guessing whether they're consenting or not. This is not sexual morality. Consent is not in and of itself morality. It's not an ethos. It's not a code of conduct. The second, as I think you've said, it sums it up perfectly well. There's a larger disconnect. Men and women are disconnected, and in that disconnection, they've drifted further and further away. And there are attempts to reconnect in ways that are fundamentally broken. Just statistically speaking, we're a society that is awash in pornography, awash in all sorts of what's now being described as sex work. Yet at the same time, you look at actual statistics of, forget marriage, we're not even talking marriage anymore, but just physical intimacy between men and women, the rates have, I think, probably never been lower. Very few men and women are actually in physical relationships with each other on any kind of sustained basis and having any kind of regular sexual interaction. So we have a society of disconnected people. It actually looks like the way Japan did about a decade ago. People who have really are just ships passing in the night. And the responses are absolutely dysfunctional. We're a society that is simultaneously sexualized yet asexual, where everything is performative, where both sides are deeply frustrated in every possible way, are angry at each other, and are unhappy, which I think is what this gets back to. People are unhappy. They don't know themselves. And if people don't know themselves, then they can't actually know anyone else. If they don't have anything to offer, then they're never going to be able to have a meaningful relationship. And we don't teach men and women, we don't teach boys and girls what they can actually offer to, I mean, there's talk about, you need to volunteer at homeless shelters, you need to save the planet, but not what can you offer to another human being? How do you treat people? Who am I? What do I want? How can I make someone else happy? This is a concept, these are concepts that have become fundamentally alien because we've torn apart codes of conduct. And I'm not saying that 100 years ago, 17-year-olds were incredibly wise and mature and principled, just a lot more so than they are today. But there were codes of conduct that enabled them to figure this sort of thing out, to build. They were the building blocks of social interaction that enabled courtships, enabled marriages. We've broken all that. We've shattered all of that. And people are able to make it work, but at the same time, fewer and fewer people are making it work. And we look at divorce rates. Yes, divorce rates are bad, but the silent divorce is the reality that people are increasingly incapable of connecting even long enough to be able to form a relationship, to get married, to build anything. And again, this is not about stigmatizing the choices that people make, because society has been damaged in ways that prevent them from doing this, that have shattered people's ability. It shattered women's ability to find a man. It shattered men's ability to find a woman. And they're, of course, primed to blame each other. There's so many men I see in the comments when I write about this who start blaming women right away. And of course, women start blaming men, and they are both victims. When we talked about feminism, it's about getting one sex to blame the other sex, whether you call it feminism or men going their own way, whatever you call it, they're both fundamentally dysfunctional. It's like your image of the women and the men just apart, with no way to connect. This is the tragedy, and this is what our enemies want. They want us to completely fall apart as a society. When you tear men and women apart, there's no future.
Absolutely, and that is what they've done. You know, and you know, I watch a lot of these shows where all these issues are being debated and discussed. And on several of these shows, the hosts have asked, they have a lot of the contemporary modern. And again, before we keep going, we just keep stressing, we're not talking about all. Of course, there are women and men who reject this establishment culture, and they suffer in their own ways, and they look for, you know, for something good and virtuous and all that. That's a given. I'm just talking about the establishment culture now and the people who are feeding into this culture that the left is propagating. But on some of these shows, there's also this show Fresh and Fit that discusses all these issues. And the host was asking all the women on his show, he says, a good man or Instagram? You got to give one up. And you already know what the answer is. Not one answered. And some people can say, oh, well, you know, that's the kind of, you know, bimbos he has on his show or whatever. Okay, maybe you can argue that, but I will tell you that from everything that we see happening and what we're watching on TV and the people we know are now growing up in this generation, this is a very, very popular answer now. And I'm sure it's also including a lot of men as well. But Instagram, this combination of Instagram, social media, the Me Too movement as well that we could talk about. I'm not even so sure what happened there, because one could argue that maybe something started off for justice, but it quickly became a man-hatred movement as well. And so, Daniel, just wait. So I want to just get to another issue, but I've talked quite a bit here. What do you think about some things that I said here?
Well, again, I think this is part of the crisis we're dealing with. And we've outsourced normal socialization society to social media. And obviously, there's a whole other angle with censorship of conservatives. But it also means that instead of building normal, healthy relationships, we encourage people to look for likes, look for social approval on social media. And even the scene you're describing kind of feels like some people are acting out a kind of social media performance in real life. They do what they would be doing on Instagram, except they're doing it in person. And they've lost the ability to connect with people in person. Thus, they're treating people in real life like they're people on the internet, like they're not really there.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I know I keep trying to counterbalance this stuff, but you know, there's a lot of compassion here for good people on both sides, in both genders, where, you know, I have many female friends who just, you know, they tell me, and I see it myself, they say, you know, okay, yeah, we want to do good things. We might want to, you know, even pursue good roles or relationships, but a lot of the men in our culture now too are absolute jerks and difficult people, and we can describe their behavior. So like we said, this is a very, very circular, difficult problem.
Suggest is the men are under socialized and the women are over socialized in the sense that they're on social media. The men are not socialized at all. They're socialized into behaving in destructive ways. And you know, that pushes people further apart.
Yeah, yeah. And you just see, I see a lot of this happening with my own eyes on both ends, in both genders. And it's kind of sad to watch. I remember just even a couple times when I first even got to LA, and some of the guys would be sitting around, then this girl would sit down, and then after they hear, oh, she's really nice, she's really nice, she smiled, she said hi. And I was always thinking, what's going on here? The behavior a little bit, I could describe a little bit the Taliban when they're around a woman. And some of this has got to do with that they're being so ignored. That's part of it, but not all of it, obviously. But something's definitely happening. And both sides kind of become very dysfunctional in this sense. But what I want to get to here, Daniel, as we're wrapping up and running out of time, just to narrow in on what these powers that be and how they're manipulating all of this, because they want to divide, they want to deprive women of male love, they want to deprive males of female love. And they want to deprive males of being happy in a male role, and they want to deprive women of what it means to be a woman and how a woman can be happy being a woman. And so the transgender movement, and you write about this, is, okay, first of all, quote unquote feminism was very much about empowerment as it began to evolve, okay, and being manipulated by Bolshevism. Empowerment. And then all of a sudden, empowerment meant masculinity. And so you just need a couple waves of feminism and leftism to sprinkle all of that. And then all of a sudden, feminism means getting surgeries for women to appear more masculine. And you write about that. That's what's happening now. It's catastrophic, and it's a war on women.
It is. If you define empowerment as a certain kind of strength, a certain kind of masculinity, and you insist on denying the sex binary, insist on denying that there are differences between men and women, then ultimately the solution, of course, is to go all the way into, yes, push women into masculinizing for real by actually undergoing surgery, which of course does not actually make them men. Injecting hormones is not going to make them men. Surgery is not going to make them men. But, you know, this is kind of living out a completely distorted ideology to its final degree, much like, you know, under Soviet Union, under communism, would push to live out impossible economic systems, things that worked in their ideological fantasies but could not possibly work in real life, through creating massive famines, oppression, systemic terrorism. So, you know, this is the same thing on a gender scale, on a sex scale, where they're actually pushing people to live out their consistence that there's no such thing as men and women by destructive surgeries, by destructive hormonal injections, and all the rest.
Right. So, you write, in 2020, the number of teenage girls hospitalized over suicide attempts rose by 50%. And suicide rates are increasing faster among teenage girls than among teenage boys. And so there's definitely a war on women and on young women. And this is the left waging war, of course, on both genders, but because of our topic today, they're depriving females of being females. And, you know, this is very interesting. The solution for them to find happiness is unthinkable because they can't take that road, because it's so, to go, let's say, find a good man and to get married and perhaps, you know, to be faithful and all these things. These are things that are completely ridiculed by their clique and by the culture.
I mean, the basic question is, what is there in life to make a human being, a man or a woman, happy? You know, the Bible spells it out. You know, Adam and Eve are created. They're meant to get married. They're meant to have children. They're meant to start a family. This is exactly what the left does not want people to do, because once you actually have a family, you're directed at your family, you're directed at your spouse, you are directed on building your home rather than on its causes. The left wants unhappy, dysfunctional people because they are foot soldiers for its causes, even apart from everything else. The left does everything possible to make you unhappy, to frustrate you, to prevent, yes, men and women from getting together, from building families, because it needs those unhappy, frustrated people to be perpetually victims, to be there on social media getting very angry about microaggressions, about all the things that they blame for their unhappiness, when, of course, they are actually the authors of their own unhappiness because they listen to the left. They listen to the voice that was telling them, do this, and this is what will actually make you happy. So the bottom line is, the thing that makes people happy is actually the normal thing. It is the thing that God laid out from the very beginning. It is actually making something of your own. And the left does not want people making something of their own, whether it's something creative, something physical, something economic, and something familiar, which is the ultimate example of making something of your own. The left does not want that. The left wants to own you. And building a family frustrates the left's agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, also just the discussions that I hear among a lot of these young women today, it's very fashionable. They're adjusting their medication. They're always adjusting their medication. They've got to go to the doctor. They're just adjusting the medication. I'm not saying that some people might not need it. That's not my point. But it's become a cultural norm. It's become almost kind of cool. And there's this thing about, oh, I'm not happy. I'm not happy. Time to go to the doctor and get some medication. We've gotten away from maybe going to church or maybe to a synagogue or whatever the faith is. They are immediately going somewhere else to be happy, as if you're just supposed to wake up one day and be really happy and not perhaps work for it or work on it, or also even to accept that, you know, quite a bit of suffering is a part of the human condition, as we know. How would you like to wrap up on that, Daniel?
Well, we, again, people have been primed to think of happiness as being something physical. It is not something physical. It is something spiritual. Happiness is not just something you can buy. And the idea, you know, we're going to tamper with your brain chemistry, with your nervous system, and now you're going to be happy. Well, no, you're not. You're actually going to be more and more unhappy. People who get addicted to cocaine and meth are trying to be happy. And of course, pharmaceutical happiness does not remotely work. Yes, we are meant in some cases to deal with ups and downs. We actually get happiness from achievement, from accomplishing something. If you're not accomplishing something, then yes, you are going to be unhappy. If you don't feel fulfilled by actually doing something, you are going to be unhappy. And again, this is a blind alley, a materialistic alley that the left leads people down, which is that you can be happy by being very self-actualizing, by knowing exactly the things that you expect society to give you and then demanding them from society and treating everyone else badly, but knowing all the correct dogma. This is the ideal, the leftist ideal. And of course, it ensures complete unhappiness. And we polish some chemicals on that, we polish some wine on that, and the result is even greater unhappiness, even greater depression and malice. You wonder where all these destructive spirits, all this destructive behavior on the left comes from. This is a big chunk of it. You know, think about what happened in the midterms. All these unmarried women who are fighting for the right to abortion, they completely ignored the economics of it, the fact that they were having trouble even paying their rent or buying food anymore. But abortion, this is the one thing that they were going to go out and fight for. This is what happens when a society is fundamentally dysfunctional, when people are robbed of meaning and purpose, and then all they have left is literally a culture of death. It is literally the conviction that somebody is about to take something from them, that if they don't have the ability to destroy something, then nothing they have is of any value. This is really the spirit of evil, and it is unfortunately the spirit of our age.
What's so disgusting, so difficult during that time, and it continues today, what the women in Iran are experiencing, their right not to wear a hijab, let's say, and not to be raped and have acid thrown in their face and to be killed, and the silence of feminists in our culture on that. And when the feminists do speak on their behalf, all of a sudden they're talking about the right to an abortion rather than talking about the right not to wear a hijab. It's incredible how the leftist feminists and the left, they even twist all of this and don't come to the defense of real brave women who are fighting for real brave freedom. Daniel, what an honor, privilege, pleasure always to speak with you. I wish we had another hour. All good things must come to an end, like a discussion with Daniel Greenfield. Thank you for joining the Glazov Gang.
Good night.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. Make sure to read Daniel Greenfield's blog, The Point, at frontpagemag.com. Brilliant blog on the internet. The best. We'll see you soon. Good night.